So the way I do it is to... Hey everyone, Erin from the Impatient Gardener here. First of all, if you are new here, welcome. A lot of people really liked the how I made my raised bed garden video, and I think we picked up quite a few subscribers from that. So if you're relatively new to the channel, welcome. I'm Erin. I live and garden in southeastern Wisconsin, Zone 5B. And on this channel, I share information and education and inspiration and what's happening in my garden. If you have been here for a while, thank you so much. I appreciate you very, very much. A lot of people said they liked the 10 minutes. A lot of people said it should be longer. One person said it could be a little longer, but if you aim for 15 minutes, it'll probably end up being 20 minutes. So maybe you should just stick with aiming for 10 and it'll probably end up around 15. And that seems like the right kind of logic. What happened to the purple velvine that you tried to overwinter? So this is Rhodochiton atrosanguineum, sanguineus. I love saying the name of that because it's such a mouthful. Okay, purple velvine. I love growing this plant. And last year I tried to overwinter. It's a perennial in zone whatever, 10 or whatever it's native to in Mexico. So it's one of those things that you can overwinter. So I brought it in, put it under my lights. And last year I had so many bug issues. I had fungus gnats up the wazoo. I had aphids. I had more aphids. I think I just generally had a lot of aphids. It really got ugly there, and I think it's because I brought in so many tender things last year, and something probably had bugs on it and whatever. The situation just got perpetuated. But the aphids went nuts for that purple velvine. So I limped it along through probably February last year, and then I ended up tossing it. So I actually have started just buying plants of that. Select Seeds will send you plants. They're like maybe 2.5 inch pots. They're small. Pot them up, grow them on for a little bit before you put them out, because you can't put them out until it's quite warm anyway. And that works well. You can also, I've had mixed luck with growing it from seed. A lot of people have issues with it. What tends to happen is it germinates right away, and you think everything's going great, and then all of a sudden it just gets real mad. And all I will say is that that is a plant that cannot handle any amount of coolness. So if you're going to start that from seed, you got to have a seed starting area that is probably warmer than most of your other seedlings would like it, because it cannot tolerate any cold temperatures. It is a fussy bugger when it comes to that. Totally worth it. Okay, this was a comment from a video I did last year on sowing foxglove and snapdragons, which reminds me, I should probably be sowing foxgloves and snapdragons right now. I think it was about a year ago exactly that I made that video. So suddenly I'm behind on seed starting. I don't start anything else early, other than onion seeds would be the only other thing I would possibly think about starting at this point. Okay, so with the Dalmatian peach being an F1, so I was growing Dalmatian peach foxgloves, and in that video I mentioned that you can't save the seed from that plant and expect it to come back true, because it won't, because it's an F1 hybrid. She says, how do they get more of the same seeds then? Do they have fields of only that planted together so the probability will be higher? So this is kind of an interesting thing. So F1 seeds are hybrid seeds. That just means that you take two different plants, they intentionally cross those plants, the seed they produce becomes the cross between those two plants. However, so this is not GMO, this is not messing with genetics. This is what bees and every other thing that makes our plants cross, all these pollinators, and not to mention people, have been doing for eons. But the thing with F1 hybrids is a lot of the things that make them good come only out of that very first cross. So there's something, if you've ever heard of hybrid vigor, this is something where a plant is extremely vigorous, more so than the species. And there's obviously a very specific cross that comes into play there. Now, F1 seeds are also patented because only the person who did that knows what those are. So basically, to make more of those seeds, they grow more of the parent plants and they cross those. So when you get F1 hybrid seeds, they are the first generation descendant of those two parents. And these things all have to be hand pollinated in very controlled environments where there's no possibility of a pollinator coming in there and cross pollinating something. So that's why F1 seeds are often more expensive than your average seed, because you can't just go collect them. They have to recross those every year. This is Carla, actually, who says, did I catch something in a post a few years ago about jumping worms in your garden? I haven't heard you mention them recently, but I'd love to hear your experience, as I recently discovered them and am quite devastated about my gardening outlook for the future. So Carla, I'm really sorry to hear that you found jumping worms, but the fact is that there are huge parts of the country now where jumping worms are running rampant. And certainly my area, they're really spreading. They're basically from the East Coast to our area. I mean, they found them out west too, in like, I think, Washington State or somewhere out there. But, you know, they're spreading quickly because they're very hard to control. So I'm sorry that you found them, but rest assured your gardening life will go on. So I think I got them in 2016, I think. I brought in some soil, and I believe that's where they started, because that's where I have always seen the highest concentrations of them. The UW Arboretum in Madison, Wisconsin, got them in 2014. And basically, Wisconsin has kind of taken the lead. The DNR and the University of Wisconsin are kind of at the forefront of the research on these, in part because it's really a big deal in Wisconsin, because if they get into agriculture, it becomes, and not to mention forests. Those are the two places where, you know, that's really where it becomes an enormous issue for the broad population. So Wisconsin has really taken the charge on researching these. The Arboretum has had them since 2014. And, you know, a lot of the things that we see coming out of there are coming out of what they're experiencing, including, for instance, a degradation of the soil that was so severe that they had a strong wind come and they lost an entire line of arborvitaes, which just literally tipped out of the soil because there's nothing left in that soil. If you're not familiar with jumping worms, these are an invasive jumping worm, or invasive worm. Now, all of our worms are invasive, at least up here. I believe there are some worms in the southern part of the United States that are native, but all of our worms here came from Europe. So everything is technically invasive, but those other worms are not really problematic, so we've sort of learned to live with them. But they're not from here. But these are really bad. These are Asian jumping worms, and what they do is they reproduce rapidly, 3 cycles a year, and they just churn through soil. They are voracious eaters. So they churn through soil, especially the top few inches of soil, and they just turn it into dust, basically. It looks like coffee grounds. That's always what they say you should look for, and that's true. So, and there's just nothing for roots to hold on to there. So that's what jumping worms do. That's why they're bad. And what I would just say to Carla is, hang in there. Just do what you're doing. Concentrate on training your plants to grow nice deep roots, because these worms do not go super deep. So this means, you know, don't water your plants all the time. Force them to seek water. You need to establish plants, and then from there, make them do the work. Because if you start watering your plants all the time in areas where that's not necessary, there are areas that are desert where that doesn't work. But most places aren't like that. You need to train your plants to go seeking for that water and put down those low roots. And then shallow rooted things are probably not going to fare well against jumping worms. But they're working on this. They're coming up with some solutions. There's a few things I may try this year that are still very experimental. One of the things, incidentally, that they're sort of looking at, and there is zero research behind this yet, is biochar, because they don't like sharpness against them. I have thrown in a lot of biochar. I don't know. We'll see. Anyway, hang in there, Carla. Don't panic. People are working on it. And one way or another, we'll get through this, because we get through all these things. There's always something waiting to attack our gardens, and we always figure out a way around it. But they're disgusting, and I hate them. Susan says, I am wondering about soil testing. Do you take a sample from different areas of the garden for this? She said, I've been thinking about doing this, but I've never done it. So That's a great question. It's important that most soil tests will give you pretty specific instructions, and they do want you to take a variety of samples from around the same sample area. But keep in mind that most soil tests are geared towards what you're growing there. So if you're going to test an area, make sure, that so for me, I would do this all in like my patio garden. I would take probably 5 or 6 samples from that garden area because it's generally the same conditions. I'm growing the same types of plants there. And then I would take a separate test from my raised beds gardens and let them know this is where I'm mostly growing food. Because the information that you get back and the suggestions you get back are based on what you're growing there. So just keep it to that area, but it is a good practice to spread it around. That said, most soil tests will give you very explicit instructions about how they want you to take the samples. Along that same line, Peggy said they checked in with their county ag office and they charged $42 to test the soil, which I do think is high. It's much higher than ours. But here's what I would say. You don't have to test your soil every year. I maybe test mine every 5 years, if that. It's more getting to know what's there, unless you're having a problem. If you're having a problem, that's another reason to have a soil test, and then you would want to fix that. But I would say this, $42 is expensive, but they're going to tell you exactly what you need to add to your soil or exactly what your soil needs. And I can almost guarantee you're going to spend $42 less on adding things than if you just willy-nilly started throwing stuff in your soil. So probably a pretty good investment, but I don't disagree. That's pretty high. I think the soil kit one that I referred to, when I did that one, I think that was $30. I'll bet you like everything's gotten more expensive, right? I had a couple of questions about managing rabbits. An example of those was somebody said, does the deer stopper 2, which is the deer repellent that I use typically, help to repel rabbits and squirrels? If not, do you have suggestions for those? Okay, here's the thing. I think rabbits are worse than deer, and I am very happy to have some natural rabbit control around here in the form of our local fox population, which I love. And this is a great excuse to show you the video of baby foxes playing in my next door neighbor's yard. The answer is, for the Messina deer stopper, no, I don't find that makes much of a difference with rabbits. Now, some things like plant skid, I think plant skid, I'm not sure about Bobex, but plant skid and possibly liquid fence are formulated to work against rabbits as well. That said, I don't have a lot of luck with liquid repellents working well with rabbits. I have had a fair amount of luck with granular repellents. So I've used the Plant Skid granules for rabbits before, and there are a few others that come in shaker cans, and I found those to be pretty good. There are some things that are made for squirrels. I haven't tried any of those, so I can't speak to those. In both cases with these, though, really the best thing to do, honestly, it's a physical barrier, if you can do that. I mean, I've got a lot of things. I've got a little cage around a clematis that the rabbits ate last year before the fox could come dispense with them. And actually what I did for winter is I wrapped a lot of trunks, and not just for deer, I wrap them low too, because the rabbits will scrape that bark, and then they get through that cambium layer, and now you've got a half-dead tree. I also had a lot of questions about dwarf tomatoes. So dwarf tomatoes are a product of the Dwarf Tomato Project, which is where a whole bunch of people, sort of led by Craig LaHoulier, who wrote the book Epic Tomatoes, came together and decided to do a breeding project where they breed a dwarf tomato with an heirloom tomato to try to get heirloom tomato taste and flavor and color and all the good things about heirloom tomatoes on a shorter plant. Most of these plants are about 3 feet tall, maybe under 4 feet tall. And this is almost exclusively what I grow now, mostly because of the height, but also they seem to be very good plants. So there's a whole bunch of them out there to try. You can dig into the Dwarf Tomato Project, but some people want to know what my favorites were. And since I checked my seed supply stash and I have enough from last year left to go, and I don't have to worry about you guys buying them before I get to them, my favorites currently are Firebird Sweet, Awesome, and Brandy Fred. Brandy Fred is a combination of Brandywine is the heirloom in that combination. So you get that Brandywine flavor and color with it. There's a whole bunch of other great ones though. So experiment with them, see what you like. Oh, and locations for those, places to buy those. Okay, so Victory Seeds sells them. I believe Totally Tomatoes sells some of the dwarf tomatoes. And last year I bought from a place called Renaissance Seeds because it was the only place I could find, I think, Firebird Sweet, and they were great too. I do think these are starting to have a moment. I hope that, I kind of like to think that I sort of helped make people aware of this, because I think it was, there's no marketing budget behind dwarf tomatoes. So I like to spread the word about this, and I've been growing these almost exclusively for 3 years now. I do think we're going to start seeing dwarf tomatoes not just being sold by more seed purveyors, but also I think you're going to start seeing them in garden centers too, sold. In fact, our Master Gardener plant sale, we grow all our own heirloom tomatoes for that, and I believe this year we are adding in some dwarf varieties as well. So I think that's already starting to happen. So Ray B says, can you talk about how you use your pop-up greenhouse to harden off seedlings? Is the process different / easier than without a greenhouse? So I do have these 2 pop-up greenhouses. These are cheap plastic things. I actually bought them on Amazon. Unfortunately, they seem to no longer make the variety that I have, but there are other ones like this. If you're shopping though, look for ones that include the racks, because if they don't include the racks, like, you're not getting yourself much space. So I have ones that are 6 by 10. I have 2 of them. I put them up in mid-April and they stay up until probably early June once everything is moved out of there. They are ugly. They're not particularly wind resistant. Last year I almost thought we were going to lose one in a big windstorm, so you do have to secure them to the ground fairly well if you're in a windy area. And obviously they don't protect that much from the elements because this is just plastic. It's not like polycarbonate or something, but they work great for what I use them for. And that is primarily hardening off seedlings. Now, to properly harden off seedlings, you know how this process goes. You gradually expose your seedlings to increasing amounts of light and wind and temperatures so that they don't go into shock or completely die when you plant them out. And usually this process takes 10 days to 2 weeks to do it right. What I do is put my seedling trays out there, and actually they will sit out there for a fairly long time. I mean, I will get them out there as soon as I can. And I put them in this greenhouse, and I use like Harvest Guard shade cloth to monitor the light that's in there as well as the temperature on them. So, you know, I'll cover them up with a couple layers of that for a couple of days, and then we'll go down to 1 layer, and then we gradually expose them to all the light they can get from that. Same with the temperature. I'll tuck them in at night if we're going to get cool. And usually, I mean, our last frost date isn't until like the 2nd week of May here, but we don't dip that low often in April. If we do, I have in the past occasionally stuck a space heater out there, run with an extension cord, which is totally not safe, I don't think, but is what I do. So that's how I manage the temperature there, and I just leave them out there, and then they just sit there and grow there until I'm ready to plant them out in the garden. And then gradually I open up the greenhouse more and more and more so they're exposed to wind and light, and then I will take the trays in and out of there. But it's a heck of a lot better than dragging them in and out. Not to mention, by this point, by that time of the year, I am really in need of getting that stuff out. I need to make room on under my lights inside. So we're churning out a lot of plants at that time. So this really helps me manage those and take care of those. I also use those to start dahlias as well. So I will move my potted up dahlias out there, and the dahlias live out there too. I have no postcards because I can't get into our post office box. Mr. Much More Patient has the good touch. These post office boxes are charming. They're ancient and charming, and you have to use this weird combination to get in there, but it's not a precise situation, and I can't make it work. So we got to get Mr. Much More Patient up there to check the mail. Okay, leave your questions here for next week. I usually have been pulling most of the Q&A questions from these videos, although I try to hit some that are of interest from other things that people have commented on over the week. Thank you for watching. Have a great week.